Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, Ancap Radio. This is Adam Carswell, the voice of liberty. Welcome back to another episode. Today, we're going to be spending some time with Chris MacIntosh. For those who don't know Chris, he is a respected money manager and thinker whose expertise is sought out by family offices and high net worth individual investors all around the world. Chris now manages money for clients of Glenarchy Capital, a macro-focused hedge fund, and is also the founder and CEO of Capitalist Exploits. With his highly acclaimed flagship investment subscription letter called The Insider, Chris has also founded and built several multi-million-dollar businesses in the investment arena, including building and managing a venture capital firm and advising for family offices internationally. Additionally, Chris founded and sold a real estate investment firm and worked in the early stage investment capital. Prior to this, he built a career at Invesco Asset Management, Lehman Brothers, JPM Chase, Robert Fleming's. Raised in South Africa, Chris has traveled all over the world, and I can confirm that from getting to know him. 7 different countries he's called home, and currently splits time between New Zealand, Costa Rica, and Dubai, which I know he's very bullish on. So looking forward to getting his take on all 3 of those locations today. And we are currently getting our speakers up here, and we have a new co-host today, Christina. Who is that? Who is Christina?
That's me, Adam.
We're joined by Dave Henderson, and he's using his wife's account today. So, Dave, good to have you here under a new alias.
I'm trying to get through some technical issues on my very expensive Samsung foldable phone that managed to shut down on me about once an hour at the moment. So I need to go and get it fixed. But anyway,
That's
that's
fine.
not
We'll get
today's
some
problem.
more.
But good morning, and Adam, and good morning, Chris.
Chris is here. We're just getting him set up here, and then Chris, if you could on your phone, probably somewhere it'll say accept request to speak. I know the team has sent that over to you there a few times. But for those unfamiliar with Chris, again, his website is capitalistexploits.at. Check it out. Make sure you give him a follow. Dave, I guess your wife's going to get some free follows today on her account.
There you go. I can confirm I'm a very fortunate beneficiary of Chris's newsletter from Capitalist Exploits, which is a sensational publication that I look forward to each month. And God knows how Chris puts that together. I have every time I read it, it's so extensive, so in depth. It's done with great humor. So it's a delightful news and very, very insightful political investment newsletter that I recommend anyone who is interested in this arena, and certainly after they hear Chris talk, that they look into it.
Absolutely, and I see we've got him here with us now. By the way, if you're tuning in for the first time or a repeat listener, wherever you're at on the recording, make sure you hit the like button, the retweet button. We want to get this one out to all the ears and eyes as possible, and give everyone up here on stage a follow while you're at it. So, Chris MacIntosh, great to have you here back on Ancap Radio. As I said, joined by Dave Henderson. You guys are both in New Zealand now. So, how's the weather for you, Chris, and Dave? Can you validate?
Well, before we get into that, I just want to make the statement that I'm extraordinarily glad that Dave is actually Dave and not Christina, and he's not self-identifying as anything else.
No, it's early stages here,
Chris. As to the weather, well, it's New Zealand, and you get 4 seasons in a day in this place. At the moment, where I am, up on the North Island, it's sort of a bit of a cold, cloudy day. But that could change at any point in time. And where you are, Dave, is likely something completely different.
Well, I'm sitting in Christchurch, New Zealand, and it is a. I haven't been out this morning because I've been caffeinating myself, having had a late night. And it's shaping up to be a gorgeous day here, but to give Adam a perspective, it'll end up being about 22, 23 degrees centigrade today, Adam. So I'm sure where you are sitting, that it's a tad colder.
Yeah, that's a good point there. Coming to you guys from the Toronto, Canada area. Chris, last time we spoke, I don't know if you remember, I was in Florida. We've relocated to Trudeau country, not because we love Justin, but we got a baby on the way. Got to be closer to family. Although I do have some theories on him, on why I think him staying in quote unquote power might actually be better for the short term. But anyways, yeah, it's about 10 degrees today, which is rare. Normally it's colder, so we'll take it.
Now, Chris and I are both in New Zealand, and I imagine if we had a meeting of the New Zealand Anarcho-Capitalist Society, that Chris and I would probably make up a quorum for the purpose of that meeting, which is both delightful but particularly sad. But that's something we've all had to come to grips with, that we are a serious minority. But interestingly, New Zealand over the last 6 years, particularly the last three, gained a rightful and terrible reputation for its COVID response, which was led by a very, very socialist, if not communist, Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who fortunately resigned the beginning of this year because she was smart enough to see the writing was on the wall for her and her political party. So we had
No,
an
no, no, no,
election.
Dave. She just ran out of gas, didn't you hear?
Oh, that's right. That's what she said, didn't she? There was no gas left in the tank.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true. So she bled for us, Chris, and then ran out.
It's a pity
But
that she
fortunately, we had an
didn't
election.
bleed out, but never mind.
Maybe that's to come, Chris. We had an election 4 weeks ago now, 5 weeks ago now.
Yeah.
God no, 6 weeks ago now, and we have a new government, and we had all of this lurch to the left, certainly for 6 years. Notwithstanding, there is an overall lurch to the left, but this was a serious lurch to the left, and we have a government now that the media would describe as conservative or right wing or some other similar, probably inappropriate appellation, but they are fundamentally. How do we describe the coalition that's formed, Chris? It's a mixture of conservatism with the odd streak of libertarianism in there. Is that a fair overview?
Well, I've always viewed much of New Zealand politics as being, you've got an option between sort of left and extreme left. The conservatives here aren't particularly conservative. They're all socialists. They just argue about the forms of socialism that should or shouldn't exist. And so, that's the way I've viewed it ever since I landed on these murky shores. And then we've got a few recalcitrant parties in there, and I think that's actually where the value lies at the moment. And certainly that's where we're getting some positive outcomes. And I'm not quite sure what bucket you put those into. They're not anarcho-capitalist.
No.
But they're not. There is elements of certainly of socialism within those. But again, sort of arguments as to where and how, our endeavours and our work should be put to solving the problems of the day via extracting our money and then using it for some other purpose, and that's really just what they all tend to argue over. And I don't really see a whole lot of that changing. I think what's more important, maybe what we were discussing before we jumped on this call, was the elements that have come to the fore, which are in our favour, certainly with respect to one could almost argue bigger elements in play, which is the massive overreach by the World Health Organization and the attendant cabal.
And to be fair, that's one of the things that the coalition government, which for the benefit of listeners outside New Zealand is a makeup of one larger party and two smaller ones. and they have had to enter into coalition agreements which make commitments to a whole range of policies. And one of them is, Chris, that they're not any longer going to sign up to the whole raft of the new WHO initiatives,
Yep.
which is a positive. And the other one that I think is reflective of madness of the political spectrum is New Zealand's smoking laws.
Yeah.
Which might sound petty or minor, but it's actually pretty significant because New Zealand initiated a whole raft of smoking laws. In fact, they were voted into law at the end of last year, which is just part of, to be fair, sincere socialists and their fantasies. And somehow they've decided that they are going to be able to rid New Zealand of smoking, and with that, save thousands of lives. And without going into the detail for a second, the new incoming government has said this is all madness, and we're going to repeal that legislation, and rightly so. But of course, the media comes out saying these people will have blood on their hands. There's 5,000 deaths a year that are now going to occur as a consequence of rolling back the smoking legislation, which is fundamentally prohibition, is what is best described as.
Well, I know we have a decent portion of our audience ready to purchase Ancap radio cigars in New Zealand, right, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't smoke. I don't think Chris probably smokes, but I do smoke cigars.
Only if lit, and I prefer not to be.
I do smoke cigars, and I've watched the price of my cigars double over about the last 3 or 4 years in New Zealand as a consequence of the taxes that get loaded on here. But, the madness of this is, and this typifies a large part of the problem, is that, I'm going to be generous here, and I'm sure I'll get shouted down. But a number of these socialists are quite sincere in their intentions. They genuinely believe that they can legislate good behavior, they can change people and modify their behavior and habits through legislation, and with that, save lives. And it's an absolute fantasy that history has proved time and time again cannot be achieved. And, a black market is going to flourish as soon as you try any of this nonsense. And the reality is the black market will work, the quality of the product will go down, and the price will go up.
Yep. It's fundamentally just an issue of busybodies that decide that they know better than you do as to how you should be operating and running your life, and basically what it comes down to that I see as a fundamental issue isn't so much the inability to allow people to make their own decisions, whether they be good or bad, but what it leads to actually is a situation whereby they have a vested interest at some point in a certain outcome, and then they shut down any discourse that could avail you of some truths. For example, if you go back and you think about some of the ridiculous things that have taken place in our history, we could start with things like lead pipes, right? Which at the time were safe and effective until they weren't. We could discuss things like the medical industry, which used to blow smoke up people's asses, literally. Was it in the 18th century? I think it was, where they believed that was there was a cure, right? And that's where the terminology now today comes from, blowing smoke up somebody's ass. Now, highly ineffectual, shall we say? But at the time, that was the expert's opinion, and it was one that people believed in. Now, the only way that you come to a realization that something is garbage is by allowing a free flow of thoughts and ideas and discussion. And what the socialists disallow is any thought or discussion that could be different to that which they believe in sincerity, as you mentioned, is the right thing to do. And so it's that shutting down of any discourse, and they do it by censorship, and they do it by legislature where they're banning certain things and whatever. Again, it's a disallowance of intellectual thought processes, and that's the only way that you're ever going to proceed as a society. And what they always do is they come in and they shut it down. And the moment you do more and more of that, and ultimately you just get into a society that is that has less productivity, less value, lower standards of living, etc., etc. So it's the fundamental psychology that comes behind what they do, and that's completely at odds with the Ancap philosophy, which is to say that individuals can and should make their own decisions, be free to do so, and be free to make the wrong decisions, just as they could be free to make the right decisions.
Yeah. And I mean, this is getting into the subject matter we were going to discuss, Chris, which is, of course, the aesthetics of Ancap philosophy, and the fact that it has this completely different set of values and worldview to the socialist set of ideas and values. But this particular notion that that one shouldn't fail. I mean, the freedom to fail is such a critical and fundamental freedom. And as soon as it's removed from society, you must equally remove the freedom to succeed. I mean, the two go hand in hand. And, you know, I've often reflected on just starting to talk about the upsides of embracing Ancap philosophy, which turns on, as much as anything, one's approach to personal responsibility. And if you were able to get people to identify where they think personal responsibility finishes, or indeed starts, you can very, very accurately identify what their political philosophy is. And of course, socialists are of the view that personal responsibility is highly limited.
I just saw we had a comment here from Anissa, who's in New Zealand. And by the way, this is for Anissa and everyone else who's tuned in here. Feel free to call in at any time. All you got to do is tap the microphone button at the bottom of the screen. We'll get you up here for your question or your comment. But Anissa said, I live in New Zealand and smoke homegrown tobacco from my neighbor. Nicotine is good for you.
There you go. Isn't that cool? Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is so ridiculously glib. Firstly, there's nothing that doesn't have some goodness in it. Secondly, of course, it's personal choice because it's your body and your life. And thirdly, smoking doesn't absolutely lead to a whole bunch of health problems, you know, which is a fundamental issue. I mean, some people may have a predilection to either cancer or heart disease, but, you know, from all the studies I've seen, 40+% of people who smoke do not suffer any significant health issues as a consequence, which again is a madness of why we just, for the sake of ease, just blanket ban it.
I'll share it in the thread here on Twitter. My friend sent me a link to exactly what we're talking about. Some ads, cigarette ads, Camel, Cool. I can't remember the other one, but from about the 1930s up until the
That's
50s,
right.
talking about how, you know, how the taste has to be right, how it has to be good on your throat. What is it? 10 out of 12 physicians recommend Camels, like that type of thing, and using leveraging doctors to say
there you go.
Smoking is okay. I think that's just the number one thing people need to look at when we face a situation like COVID, when you got 10 out of 12 saying something's good for you. Clearly, that might not be the case, just based on simple history.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the other positives that's come from the coalition, the new coalition government we have, is that they have made a commitment to a very fulsome and robust inquiry into the past 3 years and the previous government's, we'll call it, COVID response. I don't know, Chris, have you been watching the UK's COVID inquiry?
Not particularly closely. What
Right.
I've been watching more is and we discussed this just before we jumped on. Yeah, was the fight back, if you will, against the World Health Organization protocols and their treaty that they're trying to get everybody to sign. But because remember we had an inquiry, yeah? Don't you remember that one?
Yeah. Well, they started one, and it was just like every state inquiry, where they appoint 2 patsies. I think they may have appointed 3 patsies in this case. And it was just, you could have written the report for them the day they started because you knew what they were going to say. But hopefully this inquiry, the UK one, has actually had a bit of teeth to it. But the more important part of it is how entertaining it's been, particularly focusing on the WhatsApp messages and the WhatsApp chat groups of all the politicians and medical professionals around this and their duplicity.
Yeah, it was, and that's where, as soon as you have a government that is, like, if you had a government that was in power during the COVID fiasco and scam, that subsequently then puts forward some investigation into said scam, it's highly probable that you're not going to get any outcome. On the other hand, if you have an opposition government, then at least they've got some, vested interest, potentially at least, in painting their opposition in a poor light. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you get all the truth, but you're going to get, there's likelihood that you get more of the truth. And so that was the issue that we had here. And so when I look at what's happening in the UK, I've kind of looked at it with a bit of a sort of, we'll have to see, scenario. But
yeah, indeed. And that obviously, that the UK inquiry has a long way to go. But I think it's going to come up with something of some value. But more fundamentally, they are starting to look at issues like, what were the downside of lockdowns that were completely ignored because everyone was so swamped. Mostly by the modelers who were predicting, in New Zealand, they were predicting 80,000 deaths, which in a population of 5 million is just an insanity. And there was, nothing came even close to that. And in fact, the statistics now are showing that the excess deaths, which New Zealand is experiencing similar numbers to everywhere else around the world, are of course all vaccine related. There's a direct correlation. And that needs to be investigated and explored in a meaningful and significant way. But that may be a hill too far, eh?
Well, on that point, we had the Philippines just came out with an investigation that they're looking to put forward. The House of Representatives over there has put forward a resolution to try and investigate an excess of 260,000 deaths that has been experienced in the country.
Right. Over a 12-month period. Is that right, Chris?
It was for 2021. So for the year of 2021. So it was an annual period, but it was 21, not 22. And I think part of that's just down to their collection of data and stuff, and then finalization and so on and so forth. Because the indications through 22 were that they were very high as well. Nevertheless, there was 262,000 excess deaths alone in 2021, which couldn't be attributed to COVID.
No.
And so they're saying, well, what the hell's going on here, sort of thing. Anyway, so there's that taking place. Japan's had similar, not inquiries, but more and more individuals stepping up, whether it be professors and people of high regard, that are just, seeing the elephant in the room and stating such. So there's this sort of groundswell of, realization that something's not right. And then, of course, you've got, on the other side of that, you have these totalitarian, Teddy, our favoured cross-dressing transgender serial killer, who's getting quite upset because people are repudiating their pandemic treaty. And so that's where we've just seen Slovakia, which just elected a misogynistic, right-wing, extremist Nazi into power. We know that because the media told us that that's what he is. And so he's come out with a scathing, absolutely scathing statement that was made regarding this pandemic treaty and regarding the protocols that were utilized within that time frame of the pandemic, so-called pandemic. And yeah, he doesn't mince words at all, pointing out that there was no ability for anybody to have any opinion other than that which was the designated opinion. There was no ability for anybody to say no to the vaccines, and he just lays the whole thing out. And then he goes on to talk about how the World Health Organization is behind this, and there's absolutely no way that Slovakians should be in any way, shape, or form signing up to this thing. So,
how cool is that? And when when was that election, Chris?
I remember writing about the Slovakian election. I think that was maybe 2 months. 2 months ago.
Okay. And as best you can recall, was having a crack at the COVID response an important part of that?
No. Well, it wasn't specific within his campaign trail.
Okay.
He took office in October 25th. So what are we now?
Okay.
Just a month and a bit.
So 6 weeks, 6 weeks. Yeah.
But you're referring to that video you shared with us, right? Yeah. So I'm going to share that in the thread here in a moment too, so everyone can take a look at it. But it's pretty cool to see, like Dave said. Just a reminder for everyone here: welcome to Ancap Radio. If you're just joining us or tuning in for the first time, we are live with Chris MacIntosh of capitalistexploits.at. Check his website out. Go give him a follow. Dave Henderson is incognito today as his wife. That's who Christina is up here on stage. And just make sure you hit that like button, the retweet button. We're going to be going for about another 30 minutes here. So if you do want to call in, you just tap the request to speak button at the bottom. We'll get you up here on stage. You can ask Chris or Dave any questions or make any comments you like. Thanks. So I'm going to share that video. Chris,
he actually
came.
One of his big campaign things was on the energy front and saying that Russians were not Slovakians' natural enemies, and there was whatever disagreements might exist, they needed to patch things up with old Vlad and get on with business. And that was one of his fundamental pillars of his campaign
platforms. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, and of course they all voted for it. And then on the back of that, of course, we've just had Estonia coming out and saying hell no to the World Health Organization as well.
That's great.
Yeah,
we have our first caller, long-time listener, long-time caller as well. Jaffer, it's good to see you. Let everyone know where you're tuned in from and what your question is for the group.
Hi, my friend Adam. How are you guys?
Hi.
Doing well.
Adam, if you are visiting Montreal, just let me know. I'll be glad to have a beer with you.
You know what? I might take you up on that, Jaffer. Thank you for the reminder. That's good.
What about Chris and I, Jaffer? Do we get one?
If you come to Canada, why not? Welcome to the Trudeau's country.
I'm not sure they'll let me in.
Yeah, no, they will let you. Why not? You're belonging to the Commonwealth country, so why not? Yeah, I was asking myself while I was listening to you, Chris and Dave, about the Ancap philosophy, and I was questioning myself about ethics. What about ethics? And you mentioned the personal responsibility, but also I think that ethics are very important. And I'm thinking also for the Argentinian president, newly elected president, Milei, who for the first step he did when being elected, he traveled to Israel, visiting Israel, and Israel is not a Ancap country, as I know. It was maybe
No.
the first country who maybe enforced the vaccination for all the population, and it was mandatory and things like that. So how do you deal with that?
Chris, do you want to respond to that first?
Sure. So one of the things that I think is we should take as a win, firstly, is if you think about why is it that people elected Milei. Now, they didn't elect Milei, and I'm just using him as an example because you brought it up, but they didn't elect Milei because he is a friend of Israel, or because he is or was a proponent of the same measures that Israel put in place with respect to the vaccination, mandatory vaccinations, or that he used his campaign trail in order to promote war against the Palestinians or anything of that nature. Now, we all know very well that politicians lie through their teeth in order to get to an outcome that they want to get to, and that could entirely be the case. What I think is interesting is that his campaign statements, shall we say, and platform that he built that win on were almost entirely Ancap related. Again, whether he is true to his word or not, and we'll have to find out, the fact is that people around the world were notified, hey, there is the possibility of this philosophy, and they resonated with it and they voted for it. And I think that's important because what you've got is a groundswell of people who want a certain thing. Now, whether your man on the white horse who's riding around saying, "Hey, I'm the guy for you," is true or not, that underlying belief and feeling and trend, I think, should not be.
Yeah.
At all.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's an exciting proposition, is that he wasn't timid about his views either, was he, Chris?
Timid is not really
I
a
mean,
description I'd give to Javier Milei.
of Milei. This is a guy that dresses up in a Superman-style suit and calls himself Captain Ancap. I mean, he is just hilarious, isn't he, in the way he's approached this. And I would wager that both internationally and domestically, the bulk of the people tuning into him, listening to him, following him, had never heard of the term Ancap, let alone elements of Ancap philosophy. And so you're absolutely right. The fact that people then start listening to this and start realizing that there is a political philosophy that does advocate complete personal responsibility, and it has the potential to create incredibly positive changes.
Yeah, my only concern with Milei is kind of what Chris was saying about the Slovakian president, which is he's so bold in his ANCAP ways, which is great to see, that he's been publicly labeled a misogynist, right winger, and then all of a sudden, are we running into a scenario where as ANCAPs we have to rebrand the word we use because the octopus has gotten in on us?
Of
That's
course.
my only concern.
No. I mean, there has to be a potential, doesn't it, Adam? But that's no reason why why we should shy away from acknowledging any
And
positives here. And
and when do Yeah, what do you
Catherine?
think about another point? Yeah, what do you think about another very important point to my eyes? The
Yeah.
use of the American dollar in Argentina now instead of their currency. I don't remember what is it. He decided to use American dollar, which comes from the Fed. Do you think it's appropriate?
It's a good question. So if you go and you look at the statements that he's made, what he's said is that the market should determine what money is. Then, secondly, he said that all central banks are corrupt, useless, etc., etc. The worst of them being or one of the worst being the Argentinian central bank. Then, if you think about the process that's already taking place in Argentina, people are already using the dollar. It's not the only reason that they utilize the peso is because by legal tender laws they have to. Okay, so what happens if you and I were doing business in Argentina is that we'd typically do business in pesos, then we'd run home and find our money changer and convert it into dollars anyway. That just increases friction in a system, and it's an unproductive endeavor. So what he's saying is that let's just remove all the friction. The market's already chosen dollars over pesos. The peso is useless, and the central bank attempting to pretend like it has any relevance is beyond the pale. It's not worth doing anymore. Let's just simply remove it. Now, the test will come if he actually allows the market to choose a currency. At the start, because everybody utilizes dollars, they will continue to utilize dollars. However, if he allows people to go and utilize anything, Bitcoin, seashells, doesn't really matter. That'll be the true test. And I think what needs to take place there is an elimination of legal tender laws. Legal tender should not even be in law. There should be no ability for any government to determine what is and isn't legal tender. That should be down to the individual. If I want to sell you something, I could sell you. I could purchase your services to fix my car with bottles of olive oil if I damn well please. And if we both agree on that, then so be it. There shouldn't be any form of coercion as to how we go about transacting. So I think if he changes legal tender laws and gets rid of them, then that'll be a surefire signal that that he does have Ancap philosophies. The other thing I guess that we've got to just keep in mind is that he's going to have an uphill battle because I don't believe he controls all of Congress and the legislative board to be able to necessarily put through everything that he can or wants to put through. But again, I think it's a step certainly in a direction that's different to that which Argentina had, which was completely socialist under the Peronists. And that was pretty much since, the late 40s. When did Peron come in? 48, was it? Anyway, It's been a bloody long time, multi-generations.
Yeah.
And so if this even just gives people an insight that, hey, you know what, something could operate differently in this country than the way it has before, I think my hope is that it lets a cat out of the bag that is more difficult once it's out to put back, and things can even get out of control in a good way, where even if Milei is some stooge put in by the banking cabal to try and do whatever the hell, I'm not quite sure what they'd be trying to do there, but even if that was the case, once you let out a freedom philosophy with respect to monetary economics to the marketplace, and you see the inevitable results that you would get, which is a massive reduction in friction in the system, and hence much more economic progress, then I think that's probably a good thing. And one could hope that even if it didn't take off to the extent you want in Argentina, it could also signal other places. We've watched, for example, El Salvador and what they've managed to do, which is pretty phenomenal. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but
Chris,
I'm not.
what would
I'm
you
not.
estimate?
Yeah, sort of to say that
There's an
everything's going
active
to be
black
fine.
market for.
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
What I do know is that the market shows certain ideas. I think if you separate the ideas from the man, I think that's always, the idea is that we should always play the ball and not the player, right? If we look at the ball that he put forward was an Ancap philosophy ball. Now, if he lands up being a liar and a thief, well, then he's no different to any other politician, and that may well be the case. But those ideas that he put forward, the ball, if you will, is now in the consciousness of society to an extent that it wasn't prior, and I think that's a good thing, and we can't lose sight of that.
Cool. Jeff, just going back to your other question about ethics. Yeah, ethics are critically important. And indeed, I mean, that is the basis for Ancap philosophy. I mean, it is the most moral political philosophy that one can arrive at.
We do have, and I want to make sure we get to Don here. Don, I don't know if you're still available. I see you're calling in here. Jaffer, thank you. If you have more questions, we can go back to you in a moment. But Don, are you able to unmute and ask your question? I know you've been patiently waiting. You're on mute right now. We'll give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you, Don. But yeah, Dave, and we'll need to get Chris back up here, team, if you can help him out with that. But the Ancap philosophy, I think you really can't talk about it enough, right? It's the foundation.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we're talking about there was a question Jeff raised is what about ethics? Well, ethics is critically important. And ethics is fundamentally something that gets applied to any situation as a consequence of a moral philosophy, a fundamental platform of moral philosophy. And that's what Ancap political philosophy is. It's a political philosophy that says that I have no claim on my neighbor and my neighbor has no claim on me. And that all relationships should be consensual, period. And that's as simple a philosophy, political philosophy, as one could ever get, and it's certainly the most moral. And it gets into the point that Chris and I were hoping to explore here, which is really about, as we labelled it, the aesthetics of Ancap political philosophy, which is fundamentally a view that we live in a benign universe, we live in an abundant universe, that man has enormous ability to be creative, to solve all sorts of problems, and that life is something that should be celebrated, that the freedom to be able to fall down and skin your knees, and then stand back up and modify your behavior and correct yourself, take responsibility and move on. They're all critical parts of a meaningful life. But of course, those are just some of the things that get squashed and trampled on as soon as you have any form of collectivist government and government control.
100%. And I was getting ready to go over to Don, who found his way back up here, but he's off again. By the way, guys, this is Ancap Radio. We're here live for another roughly 15 minutes. So if you're just tuning in or been here with us the whole time, all you got to do is tap that request button at the bottom of the screen. We'll get you up here for your question or comment with Chris MacIntosh of capitalistexploits.at. Make sure you check out all the links in the thread for details on today's episode. So Dave, Chris,
the corollary to all of that is that socialism is a good definition for socialism is the common sharing of misery, and socialists adore misery. Socialists believe life should be miserable, and that people are fundamentally hopeless, useless, and capable of basically getting out of bed in the morning. And as a consequence, they need strong leadership, strong government, and socialist politicians turn up trying to present their credentials for just that, and then ultimately get embraced.
Completely agree.
We've lost our guest here at the moment.
Are they? Can you guys hear me?
Gotcha, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was saying the irony behind it is that by embracing socialism, the individual actually becomes that useless person who does require help.
Yeah.
And that's what we've seen, right? Is the more think about it like this: the average person in a they're going to call it a democratic country, but it's a farce. In a socialist Western country, the average person has already subcontracted out the major parts of what should be their responsible life.
Yeah.
They've already subcontracted out their health, right? Because they have now some state health insurance, and the state should, in their minds, take care of them if they get sick. And the state will have the right answers as to what their sickness is. So they're not even interested in deciding and researching and finding out what is best for their health. They will simply just take some expert's opinion because they come from the state. Education, the same thing. They've subcontracted that out, and they send their precious little children off to be indoctrinated by what is often a genocidal freaking totalitarian system, teaching increasingly bad things to them, to the extent now where they little boys are being told they can be little girls, and little girls are being told they can be little boys, and so on and so forth. Their own retirements, which is to say all of the endeavours that they've worked for all of their life, are no longer their responsibility. And in order to get to this situation, the state has basically said that the constructs of that used to apply prior to the state having so much control are no longer required, and that is basically family and even religion. And I'm not necessarily a fan of religion, but they have to eliminate those things, which is why the push towards the destruction of the family unit has been so adamantly pushed by the leftists, because that stands in the way of them providing the solution, of the state providing the solution. Now, if you go into many so-called third world countries, you'll see that families look after families. Elderly parents are looked after by their children.
Indeed.
And vice versa. And so, in the West, it's like, oh no, not having granny stay with us. No, she can go into an old age home. That's basically, and then who looks after that? Oh well, it's the state will provide that. So they've bastardized the entire societal structure, and in that situation, those individuals are weak and useless.
So,
right? And so when the state comes out and says you're too weak and useless to be able to do anything, they're actually right.
Yeah. So in essence, if we were just to look at this against a personal responsibility yardstick, I mean, all these political philosophies, in fact, can be measured against the concept of personal responsibility. With totalitarianism at one end, taking complete responsibility for everyone's existence, and anarcho-capitalism at the other end, celebrating and embracing personal responsibility, and in a complete sense. And isn't there a direct correlation, absolute unavoidable correlation between personal liberty, personal freedom, which people either sincerely or in some fantasy crave, and personal responsibility? In other words, they're two sides of the same coin. They're inseparable concepts. The extent to which one experiences liberty and freedom and choice in one's life is unavoidably directly related to the extent to which one takes responsibility for one's existence.
The flip side of this responsibility, which is what the socialists don't want you to have, is that they provide what they think or what they state as rights. Everyone has rights. Oh, you have the right for this and you have the right for that. And there's never any discussion that a right, there is no such thing as a right.
That's it.
They don't exist. A right is in their minds something that the state provides, right? Oh, you have a human right, or you have a right to fresh water. You have a right to, I don't know, a toilet, whatever.
Yeah.
But there's no right without any responsibility. Somebody has to provide the fresh water. Somebody has to provide the toilet, and that comes down to responsibility.
Indeed.
And the best transactional form in order to do that is willing buyer, willing seller, without an intermediary. And the problem for these people is that they as intermediaries, when you remove them from that equation, they realize they have no value in the world. And that's got to be one of the worst things to acknowledge about oneself, is that you are actually worthless.
Of course, any right implicitly brings with it an obligation on some other poor prick to provide that. And there is no such obligations that exist. You know, the avoidance of the personal responsibility comes with a huge personal cost, I believe, that people ignore. Because if you decide anywhere along the line that you're not responsible completely for your life, then you set yourself on a slippery slope where, like a drug or some other addictive substance, you end up wanting more and more for someone else, and generally the state, to take responsibility for your existence.
We have a first time caller here, Ancap Air. There's a little airplane as the profile picture there. So Ancap Air, tell us where you're calling in from and what your question is.
I'm out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I really just kind of wanted to highlight. I had just jumped in not too long ago, and I had heard that you were talking about the left's misunderstanding of what it means to have an actual right, presumably about things like healthcare and things like that. And I just kind of wanted to say that a lot of this misunderstanding is that they believe that right necessarily means that there is a guarantee in life, instead of just being able to access that through voluntary exchange. Yes, you have the right to exchange your property for the property of another, but as it was previously stated, that requires a willing seller with a supply in order to do that. So that's all I really wanted to just say.
Cool. Thank you. The question then that everyone should ask themselves, Chris, is to what extent do I believe that I am responsible for my existence? And at what point do I believe that someone else, whether it be a state or some other group, are actually responsible for my existence?
I think that's what it comes down to. And
well, if I may, I can.
You can't have.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one thing. You can't have freedom without responsibility. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin, and the responsibility can be painful. It can be extraordinarily painful.
Yep.
But that's the way it is. And if you get rid of the responsibility, well, there's just a long-term pain. It's the same as saving, right? If you don't save your earnings and everything else, then you get to some point in your life where you don't have anything, and you're going to experience extraordinary pain. And we're seeing this multiple times. I mean, your average 20-year-old that I come across nowadays is really just an extended adolescent. They don't spend their 20s actually doing anything productive. They just think, oh, I'm young, I can party, I can spend money, I can do this, and I travel and, play with girls or whatever it is. And nobody, there's this acceptance that is how things should operate in society.
Right.
And you could say, well, that's fine, but there's a price that you pay for that. It means that you get into your 30s and you're not an adult.
Yeah.
You're still living with mum and dad.
Mm.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all children are born socialists, aren't they? And it's only a small percentage of them that ultimately mature and embrace the fact that growing up means actually nothing more than being able to take responsibility for all your choices.
100%.
Ancap, you had another question?
Yeah, another question. I'd like for him to chime in. And also, if you could just tell us a little bit about what you're working on. I mean, Ancap Air, it sounds pretty cool. And I see it looks like you've been putting some work in there. So feel free to shed a little bit of light on yourself as well.
Well, I appreciate it. I misunderstood that. I thought that you were actually asking the question to me, which is why I started to answer. And then you followed it up with a very solid answer. So, but a little bit about me. I used to have a podcast back in the day. I no longer do. I'm an author. I'm working on my second book. And I'm just an advocate for anarcho-capitalism, really just anarchy. I don't view anarchy is necessarily capitalistic because capitalism is nothing more than the free and voluntary exchange of private property. And so anybody who says otherwise is severely misinformed or is deliberately misrepresenting capitalism. So
Sure.
I'm working on getting my pilot's license here probably in the next year or so. I would love to ultimately kind of create like a flight vlog on YouTube that's kind of serves as a podcast as well, championing anarchist and pro-liberty ideas. But I haven't got out, the logistics of that quite yet. It's just an idea. And who knows, maybe I can help shuttle people around to like Pork Fest or any of these other pro-liberty gatherings. Using if I ever became a crypto millionaire, using my own private plane. That's just kind of where I see my trajectory going, where I would like it to end up, and all that fun stuff. So I didn't mean to hijack the show, so I apologize.
Cool. No, we were
I appreciate it.
We were fantasizing that you were going to be leasing a few A380s and branding them Ancap Air and starting to show what a real airline might be able to be in the unregulated market.
Yeah, I would love to do that. The only issue that I see is the FAA is
of course.
Is the one of the biggest powerhouses of all the regulatory agencies out there.
They make the IRS look benign.
Yeah, I did hear a wonderful story. I don't know if there's any legitimacy to this at all, but I did hear a story of a pilot who did not have a commercial pilot's license, but he owned a restored P-51 Mustang that he converted to having a second seat, and he would sell people a hat for $600, $800, $1,000, and as a result, they would get a free ride in the P-51 Mustang. And when the FAA came to try and investigate him for, practicing under commercial pilot's license rules, he said, I'm not making money off of my airplane. I'm making money by selling hats.
Of course, he's merchandising. That's cool. Yeah, no, isn't that delightful? And of course, here we love anyone who sticks their neck out, finds a way around mad rules, regulations, policies, or whatever. Hey, Adam, we are in the process of creating the Guy Fawkes Award to recognize people who find their way around various government edicts, policies, laws, or whatever, and who embarrass the state as a consequence.
Yeah, it sounds like you're onto something special there, Ancap Air. So everyone, make sure you go give him a follow too. We want to support that, and we look forward to seeing you here around more often on Ancap Radio.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I do have to hop off. I got some honeydews to do, but I appreciate you letting me speak for a little bit and
thank you.
Sharing the stage a bit. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Go get those honeydews. All right. So Dave and Chris, we're going to wind it down here as well now. If we could just kind of go around and do some key takeaways from today's discussion. We'll start with Dave and go to Chris. But what really stood out to you the most here today, Dave?
Well, we were going to delve into in more depth the entrepreneurialism that should flow from an Ancap philosophy, the zest and zeal for life that necessarily flows from embracing the principles and concepts of personal responsibility, the considerably different viewpoint that flows from such a philosophy versus the miserable aberrated existence that flows from any socialist philosophy. And it's not just about political freedom that the Ancap philosophy is about. It's actually about significant steps towards increasing one's personal freedom, liberty, and of course, increasing choice in one's life. So we touched on it. Unfortunately, we got waylaid with some political discussions, but it's something that that Chris and I can come back to perhaps more fully.
100%. Chris, did you have any comments there or key takeaways?
Just on the back of what Dave mentioned there, I think the essence that's worth considering is that socialism essentially corrupts and bankrupts the mind because it removes responsibility. And responsibility is the anvil on which we actually build anything of value, right? And so when you bring responsibility to the table, that is when human mind is put to work to solve that particular issue, whatever it might be. And then the free flow of exchange and ideas is what's required as the sort of the grease to allow that to take place. And that's when we have the best outcomes for humanity. And so it's a matter of understanding what the negatives are as well as the positives. And so for many people who I think is living in a sort of socialist type of environment, you get punished for actually being productive. You get punished for coming up with ideas. I mean, income tax is basically the fine that you pay for the crime of being productive. But at the core of it all is responsibility. And if you look around the world today, you will notice that there's certain jurisdictions and parts of the world where responsibility is just taken as a given, and people have to be responsible. Ironically, it is the places that typically are developing markets as a consequence of the fact that they just don't have enough money to actually bring in anything other than socialism. Where even if the stated goal is socialism, in many respects, the free market operates under the scenes, and largely that's been Argentina to some extent. We talked about the use of the dollar as opposed to the peso. That's just the market saying, fuck it, we're going to use this anyways because it's a better medium. And I'm not a proponent of the dollar. I'm simply stating that there's a free market exchange that takes place, but it takes place with so much friction. And that's because the responsibility has been removed by the state. The state has said, no, this is what's going to happen. And it takes the responsibility from the individual to choose what that medium of exchange should be. And the same is true of any particular endeavor. So that's the takeaway, I think, from my side.
Yeah, so that hits hard for me just off the back of what you said, because I've never looked at it this way before until you just said it. But, there's a direct correlation between responsibility and money, and it's even more evident if you're in a developing country because of the lack of capital in some of those areas. So this has been good. This has been very good. Chris MacIntosh was our guest here, everyone, on Ancap Radio. If you're not following him already, make sure you go follow Capitalist Exploits. His URL is in the thread as well, capitalistexploits.at. We're joined by co-host today, Dave Henderson, who is using his wife's phone today. So if you want to give Christina a follow, I'm sure she'd appreciate it as well. We'll be back here next Thursday at the same time with our we have another South African joining us next week, MC Laubscher, also known as the Cash Flow Ninja. MC's always a good time. So looking forward to that one. Make sure if you're not subscribed to Ancap Radio email updates, you get on that list. Again, the link is in the thread below. We've got the website launching within the next 2 weeks. Yes, we'll go ahead and say it now. Within the next 2 weeks, if not sooner, ancapradio.com will be ready. And many, many more things that we're excited about here. So, Dave and Chris, thank you again. And Chris, thank you for your second, third, maybe even fourth appearance here. I don't remember how many, but it's always good, and definitely looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Great to have you on as always. And as Adam reflected on, your newsletter is a sensation. You do a fantastic job with it. So people need to have a look at that.
I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. See you guys next week.